We were talking about Iran.
Iran. Okay, let's hear it.
Well, I want to hear it from you. I mean, I haven't made a decision on this. What I was saying is that, well, first of all, thank you all for being here. Thanks, Nick. This is really sort of for you. So we can talk about whatever you want, and I'm happy to talk about local stuff or national stuff. We've done about, I don't know, 30 of these things around the district in the last couple of years, and I always find them really useful. So, on the subject of Iran, as you know, the president and the administration reached an agreement recently on the Iranian nuclear program. It's coming to Congress in September under a piece of legislation called the Corker Amendment, which requires that we vote on disapproval. So this is a Washington kind of scheme, where we don't vote to approve it, we vote if we want to disapprove it. And if the Congress votes to disapprove it, the president could veto that, and so the president really just needs a third of each house to sustain his veto, and he'll get to go forward with this deal. So that's the procedural background. The question is, what am I going to do? And I want to hear from you. You know, obviously, I think everybody agrees we're not going to let the Iranians have a nuclear weapon. And the question is what's the best way to stop that?
Well, I don't really understand the legislation. It seemed like there were time intervals involved, and long term, like after 10 years, weren't they allowed to develop?
I can give you a summary of what it says. I mean, and I have a big advantage on you. So I spent about 3 hours this week with the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Energy, John Kerry and Ernie Moniz. About half of that was in a classified session, which I obviously can't talk about. But I'm up to speed on this. I've read the agreement. The bottom line is that for the last 12 years in earnest, the Iranians have been pursuing an enriched uranium program, which is not cannot be explained for any other reason than to create a nuclear weapon. They have essentially several pathways to that. Primarily, they can enrich uranium. They have two sites, Nordau and Natanz and Fordo, that can do that. And they have a heavy water reactor in a place called Arak, A-R-A-K, not Iraq. And that's one path. Enrich uranium is another path. And then, of course, there's a covert path, which we would worry about. They could acquire a weapon or technology through some proliferation source in North Korea or Pakistan. The most concerning thing is that they have gone from having a small number of centrifuges and a small stockpile of enriched uranium to thousands of centrifuges and a huge stockpile of enriched uranium. The way it works is you have to enrich uranium up to about 90% before you can create an explosive device. Then you have to weaponize it, and there's a bunch of steps. But essentially, the thing you worry about is what they call the fuel cycle, getting uranium out of the ground, mining it, milling it, processing it, and then enriching it. And if you think about it as a washing machine spinning, what it does is it enriches it so it gets more and more concentrated. And as you do that, of course, each time you do it, what you start with is more concentrated than before, and so that it moves faster as you go along. So it takes a long time to enrich up to about 20%, but from 20% up to 90%, it's much faster. And so what happens is they have been enriching up to about 20% uranium. And that's why you hear people say, well, they're only a few months away from a bomb. It doesn't mean they are literally a few months away from a bomb, meaning they're moving towards it. It means that if they chose to further enrich, they could do it that fast. And so this confuses people sometimes because people think, well, you know, I've heard they're a few months away, but a few months have gone by, are they there? What we mean is that if they chose to keep going with that enrichment cycle, they could get there fast. Under the terms of the agreement, they would be required to go down from about 12,000 kilograms of enriched uranium, which they have now, and 19,000 centrifuges, down to about 300, and the uranium was enriched to up to 20%, although some of that has already been addressed. They'd be required to go down to about 5,000 centrifuges, about 300 kilograms of enriched uranium, so a 90+% reduction in their stockpile. And it could not be enriched above 3.67%, which cannot be used for a nuclear weapon. So under the terms of the agreement, they could have no enriched uranium and not nearly enough, and not nearly enriched enough to weaponize. So if they lived into the terms of the agreement, they literally could not have enough uranium for a nuclear weapon. And by the terms of the agreement, they agreed not to have a nuclear weapon and to become a non-proliferation treaty state, which means they could have, like all signatories to the NPT, a peaceful nuclear program for research, for medical purposes, for energy, for other uses. But unlike most NPT countries, the agreement has what's called a special protocol, which requires them to have the most extensive set of inspections any country has ever agreed to, which would allow essentially the IAEA, which is the International Atomic Energy Association, agency, to go in and look at essentially any place they wanted to, and there's a whole kind of mechanism on that. So what people worry about is really, are they going to cheat? Do they want to agree about this? Can they do things that we wouldn't know about under this? Is there too much leeway and time for us to say we want to go look at that site? That dispute mechanism. Can Russia or China veto something and play games with us? I mean, these are all really serious questions, right? What if they cheat, and we've let the sanctions go? How do we put them back on? And so these are all the primary issues right now. What has worked is that, and I give the Obama administration a lot of credit for this, and I'm very critical about other things, but on this I think they deserve credit, which is that they have really brought Russia and China to the table in a way that has never happened before with the Iranians. And other countries that would be doing business with Iran and buying energy from Iran, like India and other countries that have really been critical to enforcing these sanctions. The sanctions have kept the Iranians from accessing about $56 billion of their own money that is in overseas banks. Zero of that is in the United States bank. So that's why the international cooperation is so important. It's in places like China or India or other places. And you will hear people say they're going to get 150 billion. That's an exaggeration. It typically is non-performing loans and other sources of money that wouldn't actually be cash in the regime. But whether it's 56 billion or 100 billion or 150 billion, it is largely not under our control. It is being withheld from the Iranians. It's their money. It's being withheld from the Iranians because of the participation of our allies in this sanctions regime that has brought them to the table. And those sanctions have been so severe that they really have seen a very serious compression of their own economy, and there's a lot of evidence that they have worked in terms of making them serious about this negotiation. So the question is, what do you do?
Do we trust them?
What's that?
Do we trust them?
No, we don't.
If the money is released, will it end up as arms in Syria?
Well, that's right. No, and there's no reason it couldn't. And even under the terms of this agreement, they could abide by this agreement. And that 56 billion or 100 billion or whatever it is could absolutely be used. Now there are other UN resolutions and there are other reasons why that's not supposed to happen, but it's happening now. So we know they are destabilizing Yemen. We know they're funding Hezbollah. We know they have militia in Iraq, that some of which we see as useful because they're fighting ISIS, and some of which we don't because they're dominating the Sunnis and the other elements in Iraqi society. Point being, they can keep doing all that, and yeah, common sense will tell you they're going to have tens of billions of dollars or even $100 billion they don't have now. And a lot of that is being used for things that we think are really, really, really harmful, and certainly that harm our friends in the region. If you listen to the folks at the Treasury Department or elsewhere, they will tell you they also have enormous unmet domestic needs in terms of their own problems and their own infrastructure and their own needs. So it's not at all clear how much of this will go to foreign adventurism and how much of it will go to domestic consumption any more than if remember, Iran is about a $400 billion economy. It is under enormous pressure economically. It has an economy that has been really, really hurt by the sanctions regime, and it is fighting multiple foreign wars throughout the region. And we know what it's like when we're fighting a foreign war and the pressure that puts on our own budget and everything. So for their own, don't assume any good motives, but for their own security, for the regime trying to protect itself, for what it has to do to invest in its own energy industry and do the things it wants to do, there's a lot of unmet needs there. So how much of it would go to terrorism? How much of it would go to proxy armies throughout the region? My guess is a lot of it, but I don't know how much. So that's one of the concerns. Now, the administration would say, right, but that's happening now. And the question is whether you want to deal with Iran as a troublemaker, as a nuclear power or a non-nuclear power. And I think that's a little simplistic, but their argument is, which I think is fair, which is we are trying to isolate the nuclear issue because if we can keep them from having a nuclear bomb, everything else we can also keep dealing with in lots of other ways that we deal with it now, from interdicting those weapon shipments to, organizing our regional partners and, doing all sorts of things on that. But if they develop a nuclear weapon, it's a totally different game. And so you're back to the same old question, right? Which is, are you better off with this thing or not? And if you're not going to do this deal, what are you going to do? And see, I think the thing that has changed, and I don't want to give you a monologue on this, but I hope this is helpful in terms of just sort of background. The thing that has changed is that we have a president and a secretary of state that have struck a deal, right? I mean, some of my colleagues in Congress act like we can go back and change that. We cannot. We are where we are now. That is the consequence of having a president and secretary of state. They've struck a deal, and our international partners think it's a great deal. And so the question is, if the United States Congress says we do not, which is our prerogative, right? It is a fair question to say, well, what are the Europeans going to do? What are the Chinese and the French and the Russians going to do if we walk away from this thing? And of course, what are the Iranians going to do?
Israel.
Some would argue, well, we can keep them together. We can go back and get a better deal. I don't know, maybe. I think it is more likely that what will happen is that you will see certainly the Russians and the Chinese, but probably some of the Europeans say, you could have had a deal. We're going to go our own way on this, and you will see a lot of that money that we're talking about going back to them anyway, and you will see a lot of economic activity happen that isn't happening now, and you will sort of see the P5+1. That's the group that we put together, permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany, start to fall apart a little bit. So the danger is that they kind of go their own way, and or the Iranian regime says, well, we have no choice but to pursue, the program we were pursuing, and we're pretty far down the road. So what do you want to do? If we go nuclear, we know you can't mess with us ever again. So the only question is can we get there before you strike us? And if you strike us, how far will it set us back? And you guys really want to be in this or not? Because people should understand, a war in Iran is not a simple thing. I've dug into this because we all heard people tell us how easy Iraq was going to be, and we are still dealing with it, right? And I will tell you, even if you believe we should reject this deal, even if you believe we need to confront them militarily, you have a responsibility to say, what is that going to mean for our own country, for our own kids, for our own, right? For our friends in the region. And remember, the enemy gets a vote too, right? We're not just going to bomb them and then wait to for the smoke to clear and see what damage we do. We have enormous number of forces in the region, right next door in Afghanistan, as well as in the Gulf. We have a lot of ships in that region in a very narrow area. There are all kinds of scenarios about asymmetrical attacks on our forces, on our troops. The possibility of escalation is real. If we lose an aircraft carrier or some sort of ship in the Gulf with a lot of American servicemen on it, I don't know whether we just stop because we've damaged their nuclear facilities. I mean, you have to think these things through. And also, even if we bring down the wrath of God on their facilities, it will not prevent them from going back at it, right? And we can keep bombing them, but they can also go back at it.
Mr.
And then
Congressman,
you have to ask yourself, can we permanently stop
I don't want
it?
to cut you, but what you're looking at Iran and the Israeli problems with the Palestinians, don't you think that's the reason why Iran is so insistent that it moves towards nuclearization?
I don't think the Iranians have much interest in the Palestinians at all. I think Iran's interest is in becoming a regional superpower, and its own sense of itself as an ancient Persian empire, and the rift between the Sunni kingdoms and the Shiite kingdoms. And I think from Iran's perspective, it wants to be a superpower, and it would be able to dominate the region and on an extreme end destroy Israel or dominate the Sunni states if it had that kind of weaponry. There are people in Iran who want to do that. No kidding, want to do that. You know, the question is who's calling the shots, and what they agree on is up to now is that they should move in that direction. They'll get the world's attention and respect. You know, what they've got is they've got a crisis on their hands. They've destroyed their own economy, but they've enriched a lot of uranium, and they're really close to having that kind of technology. So I don't think they care much about the Palestinians. But I want to keep talking. So we want to take a question.
What I've been studying this from like years ago, it's very complicated and this now. Iran, by picking up a nuclear weapon, talks on a higher level to you, rather than being talked down. We have to, I mean, you can go back to 1954 when the Shah was ousted in an election. The United States staged a coup and put the Shah back in. That's where the trouble really started. I mean, it started at the end of World War I.